Finding Lincoln by Anne Malaspinka. Paintings by Colin Boothman. On his way home from school, Lewis walked past the main library. The doors swung open, and Lewis could see an enormous room filled with books. Why, there must be millions of books there, or maybe more. Lewis wished he could go inside and count them for himself. The books reminded Lewis that he had to write an essay for President Lincoln. But the library was for white people only, just like the strawberry milkshakes at the drugstore lunch center, the swings in the city park, and the best seats at the movie theater. In 1951 in Alabama, and Lewis could play all his piano scales and roller skate backwards. Still, he couldn't borrow a book from the main library. How about some lemonade? Asked Mama when Lewis got home. I'm not thirsty, he sat down, kicking his foot against the table leg. What's the matter? Lewis didn't feel like talking. He was thinking that Daddy always had books piled high by his bed. But he had read those books again and again and again and again. Now, Daddy wanted a book on honeybees so he could learn how to keep beehives. If Mama was ever going to have fresh honey, Daddy needed to go inside that library too. Maybe a little homework would cheer up, teased Mama as she let the biscuit dough rise for supper. That morning, Mrs. Yates had told Lewis class about the Civil War. The North and South went to battle over many things, including slavery. The Southern farmers said they needed slaves who planted taboo and picked the cotton. Tobacco and picked the cotton. President Lincoln wanted the slaves to be free. He dared to stand up for what he believed in, and that made a lot of people mad, said Mrs. Yates. Lewis raised his hand. Did President Lincoln shake things up when he was a boy? Mrs. Yates doesn't know the answer. Why don't you find out and write us an essay? She said, giving him a book about Lincoln. But the book didn't say anything about young Abe. Now Lewis stared at his blank paper. I need to find a book about President Lincoln when he was a boy, he told Mama. I have an idea, Mama said. After the biscuits were baked, she told Lewis to the basement of their church. She and her friends had started a small library where people donated books they didn't want anymore. Lewis saw cookbooks, mysteries, and a book of maps, but no books about President Lincoln or honeybees. One day soon we'll be checking books about the main library. You wait, Mama said on the way back home. Lewis didn't want to wait anymore, and he wasn't going to. The next day after school, Lewis stopped in the front of the main library. Holding his breath, he climbed the wide steps and pushed open the door. Everywhere he looked, The books were shelved high up in the sky. Louis didn't have time to count, but a million seemed about right. But the library was also full of people. Every one of them turned to stare at Louis. In the quiet room, Louis's heart was beating as loud as Tigran. Bam! He began walking into the front desk. He was so nervous that he bumped into the main chair. Bam! Ouch! Watch where you're going, boy, said the man. Excuse me, mumbled Louis. On the polished floor, he had sneakers squeaked like an old rusty hinge. Two librarians sat on the desk looking at him. Can you read? Said one, pointing at the whites-only sign next to the door. Louis' face burned like it did when he ran fast on a hot day at August. Ha! Ha 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 ha! You better go home, The second librarian put down the book that she was holding. You better go home, she said, leading Louis back to the door. As she gently pushed him outside, she whispered, Come back tomorrow after 5. Louis didn't see how tomorrow would be any different. Still, Mrs. Yates was waiting for that essay. He had to go back.
Sorry.
Louis didn't see how tomorrow would be any different. Still, Mrs. Yates was waiting for that essay. He had to go back. The next afternoon, Louis told Mama he needed to run and ran. Before she could ask a question, he was off. Wait a minute, la 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 la. He ran all the way to the library and ran up the front steps. It was after 5 o'clock. The door wouldn't budge when he pushed it. Just as Louis turned to go, he heard a voice. Shh! Come in quickly. The door cracked open and the librarian from yesterday peeked out. Inside the library was dark and quiet. Now what book did you want? I need a book about President Lincoln when he was a boy. Follow me. Louis followed her down on a stack of books, then another. She stopped, moving her finger along a high shelf. Here it is. She pulled down the book. Her hand was shaking like Louis's inside. She could get a big shovel for helping him. She might have to pay a fine or even lose her job. Louis read the cover, Abe Lincoln Grows Up by Carl Sandburg. He had found just the right book. And Louis thought something. Do I need a library card? Even Daddy and Mama couldn't get a library card. Staring at his sneakers, Louis wished he could disappear. The librarian was quiet for a moment. Then she tapped him on the shoulder. Come on, I'll give you a temporary one. You do live in town, don't you? Louis raised his hand. Yes, ma'am. This librarian didn't seem to mind shaking things up at all. Walking slowly down the street, Louis looked at the book and his history card at the way home. Louis burst in the kitchen door. He couldn't wait to tell everybody. When she heard what happened, Mama threw up her hands in amazement. Daddy shook his hand like he had when Louis caught a catfish up the lake last summer. Isn't that something? He kept saying. Isn't that something? I don't know what that means. Mama put her arm around Louis. I hope no one got in trouble. Daddy cleared his throat. Mama and I just want you to be careful. That night, Louis and Daddy read about young Abe and his kindness to animals. Though he grew up in the wilderness, Abe didn't like to shoot game. When he saw his friends hurting a turtle, Abe refused to join in. He didn't care if he wasn't like another boys. Abe also liked to have fun. Once he lifted a boy upside down so he could walk across the ceiling. What? Abe had to clean up the muddy footprints. Abe could swing in an axe driver plow and win a wrestling match with anyone he met. What he liked best was to read a book. Some people said he was lazy and thought too much. Abe was just in a hurry to learn everything he could. When Louis sat down to write his essay, he filled up 3 whole pages. President Lincoln did what he thought was right, even when it shook people up, Louis said at bedtime. Mama leaned to give him a hug. Just like you, Louis. Before Louis fell asleep, he remembered something. The next time he went to the main library, he needed to find a book about honeybees for Daddy. Out of a million books, Louis was sure he could find the perfect one. The end. Feet video. Bye bye.